Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. Tonight, I have a pretty awesome show. We're going to be drinking a lot of Old Pulteney. I've got Nick here. Nick is an expert on Old Pulteney, and he's going to take me through a bunch of their offerings. So I get to kind of sit back and enjoy it, and he gets to do all the work. So thank you guys for joining us here on Friday night. And Nick, why don't you just take a second and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
I've actually never done a live stream, so this is my first one. I'm pretty excited about it.
Awesome.
But I'm Nick Taylor. I founded a company called Taylor & Taylor Whiskey Co. with my brother. And I was trying to describe to Bill a moment ago what I actually do. It's a tough question. But really, we do whiskey education. We get hired by some distilleries to do their brand work, brand ambassadorial stuff, and we do a little bit of importing here and there. And if anybody else has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer what we do.
Cool. So you try to educate people on whiskey, just like I do, except you actually know what you're talking about.
No, I basically, when I got started in whiskey, I started reading books, and I started reading about like the water and the grain and those things being these like fundamental components of whiskey. And then I went to Scotland, and that's not what they talked about at all.
What did they talk about?
They were immediately, it was all about the cask. It was about the still shape and size. And I started to quickly discover that even when you're at the distilleries, half of what you're told is, I wouldn't say completely untrue, but sort of fabricated, or it goes along the company line. And so that just fascinated me. And when I started working in retail and teaching people about this stuff, I discovered that there was just an abundance of people who were fascinated by it. And I was like, oh, people really want to like learn what actually drives their hobby. And that became a real passion of mine.
Awesome. That's a really cool story. I originally met Nick. We were at Julio's Liquors, which I talk about all the time on.
Yep.
And he was teaching a class on a
knock.
We were just talking before this.
A knock on the door.
I always, in my head, I picture ANC, and I'm like, what is that noise again? You know.
Yeah. Also, why is it the large C that's capitalized that's silent? Yeah.
Why is there a knife on the label?
I don't know.
For that? No. What is that one? The Enoch. Which one has the
blade? The cutter, the rudder, the flotter.
Yeah. Oh, okay. There's a lot of them. Okay. So anyway, he was doing a class essentially on that and teaching a whole bunch of stuff, and he was just throwing out all kinds of different fact stuff, and I was just like, that guy's interesting, I want to have him on the stream. Cool. And I basically walked up to him, I said, you're interesting, I want to have you on a stream. And he said, cool. So
yeah, then I got sick for 3 months, and but hey, now we're here.
Yeah, so awesome. So do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing tonight?
Yeah. Let's jump into Old Pulteney. I'm excited to do Old Pulteney. There are a bunch of new releases, and the head distiller, actually, Malcolm Waring, is going to be in town next week for the first time in 4 years. So this is as unusual as the Olympics. So I'm pretty excited about that.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, no, right? Old Pulteney has just been a favorite of mine. And when the 17 and the 21 went away, I was just like, what are we doing here?
Right.
So they've brought some new things to market, and they're pretty awesome. So
nice.
Yeah, look forward to it.
So actually, one of the before we even get into that, so one of the whiskeys I reviewed a little while ago, it was like well over a year ago, was the 1983. Which, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, and I haven't
almost brought that tonight.
Did you really? I would have enjoyed it, but yeah, it's funny because I haven't reviewed the 12, but I've reviewed the 1983. You know, so what is this? Bill, get closer to the mic. Oh, all right. Actually, I'll turn up the gain a little bit. All right. Either I turn that up or down. Let me know if that's better. But while we're waiting on that, show of hands. A bunch of people I know in the chat have Old Pulteney with them tonight. So who's drinking Old Pulteney tonight along with us, and which ones do you have? I promise that it's legit, and I'm no way trying to trick you into becoming a webcam star. Also, I don't know if you saw it. I was filming in a hotel room over in San Diego last week, actually, and I took a picture because I had like arranged all the lights from the room to be in this weird concoction to try to get some good lighting, and I took a picture of it, and I was like filming in a hotel room, just another way I'm like a porn star. All right, so they're saying you're quite a bit louder, so I'm going to just...
I'm louder? All right.
All right, cool. They're saying we're good. All right, so let's pour this guy, because...
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, So we have a little bit of the 15.
Did we open it?
Yeah, I opened it, but I haven't poured anything out. Right. Grab a new glass. I've got plenty.
We've got plenty. We've got plenty. All right.
Yeah, so we were drinking the 15 before the camera went on because that's
just because
rock stars do.
So.
Awesome, thanks.
Rock stars are porn stars.
Yes.
All right.
All right, so the 12. So other than being 12 years old, this one's still the 43. I know that they just dropped the 40%. Do you have any insight into that by any chance?
Yeah, I think for the most part, 40 they think of as being approachable, as being easy to drink. I get into an argument with them and basically everybody I work with about this because I just think that the percentage should be higher. But a lot of times people who are new to whiskey, they grab something and the first question that they ask themselves is this smooth or not? And I hate the word smooth. I can't begin to tell you how much I hate the word smooth. It's a word, honestly, you want to talk a bizarre history. It's a word that the whiskey industry introduced into the marketplace when they were trying to compete with vodka 50 years ago, right? And like vodka was all about, it's so easy to drink, it's so easy to drink. And so it was the same thing. It was like, we want people to like it because it's smooth. And so if people are new to it and they're trying to decide, is it smooth or not? I mean, one of the first things that's causing that sharpness or that heaviness that people associate with not smooth is the alcohol content.
Right.
And then honestly, like, you drop it 3%, you increase the water that you're putting in there, and you're increasing the profitability of the company. And so one of the things that I think everybody's scared to talk about is how much the economy of the process is really dictating to actually the flavors. Because like one place that people talk about all the time is fermentation. If you go to Scotland, they'll tell you that fermentation doesn't matter.
Okay.
And that's absurd, right? The whole beer industry exists by fiddling with the fermentation, right? Miyagikyo, the way that they create in Japan, the way they create their diversity of flavors so that they can do the Nika blends because they won't trade barrels with Suntory, and there's so few distilleries in Japan. The way they create that variability is they have 500 different experimental yeast strains that they use, right? So it's like, it's absurd to think that. But they use a yeast in Scotland that increases the percentage of alcohol for the beer because it makes them 15% more profitable. Because candidly, if they're making single malt, 90% of all Scotch consumed to this day is in blends. If they're making single malt that they're selling to blends, they're just printing money, right? And so it's like there are all these little things that are subtly affecting how we taste stuff and what it tastes like.
That makes sense because it could have variability because they're able to smooth it out by blending it, right? So, I was gonna save that till I took the first sip, but it just felt.
But it just felt. All right, let's jump in.
Anyway, so cheers,
guys. Cheers.
Yeah. So that's good because I actually, I'm not even joking, I wouldn't call that smooth.
You wouldn't call that smooth, and
no, I mean,
honestly, Old Pulteney is not a whiskey that you would usually mistake for being smooth.
Right.
Notoriously oily.
Yeah.
And I've been digging into sort of the chemistry of mouthfeel recently.
Okay.
And I'm not very good at chemistry, so it's really like a drag. I took chemistry 3 times in college and never did particularly well. And it was as soon as I started drinking whiskey that I got better. Ironically,
that's
I should have been drinking whiskey in college, right?
Yeah.
But I recently was looking at how Old Pulteney was getting his texture, and there are a bunch of different components that will give whiskey its texture. Everything from the fermentation to the still shape and size to the wood they're using, and those are really the biggest levers that they're pulling to affect the texture. The one kicker with Old Pulteney is they use worm tub condensers.
Okay.
And worm tub condensers is one of the most baffling things to read about because I've literally read people that you would really respect, like Bill Lumsden. There's an article about worm tub condensers, and Bill Lumsden is quoted basically saying that worm tub condensers will make the spirit lighter, right? But then you think about all the single malts that have worm tub condensers, like Ben Rennis and Dalwhinnie and Cragganmore and Craigellachie and Old Pulteney, and they're like big oily whiskeys. And I was talking to Gordon Bruce, who's the distillery manager at Knockdo that makes a knock, and he basically said, no. You actually are lowering your copper contact, even though a giant worm tub condenser has 100 meters of copper pipe. You're lowering it because oxygen can't get into that pipe and clean out the copper sulfate.
Right. Yeah.
Super geeky. I apologize to anybody who's just going, what the hell is he talking about? But basically, copper's pulling the sulfur and a lot of those heavy compounds out of the spirit during distillation.
Right.
And so you would think like all that extra copper, you're going to be pulling out all of that sulfur, right? But the problem is the copper sulfate cakes on the inside of those, right. And if oxygen doesn't get in, the copper doesn't quote unquote rejuvenate, and it actually retains its meaty, sulfury, heavy character.
Okay.
So that's what I've read as well, and basically you've got all these authorities, and they're saying completely opposite things, which is why whiskey's really fun, right? Because it's like it's not like wine where it's like viticulture has been established for 500 years, and there's the W set, and there's sommeliers, and everyone's a sommelier, and everybody knows exactly all the same rules. Whiskey's just it's still got a good mystery component to it.
It's a bit of the Wild West.
Yes,
you can kind of get away with saying whatever they want.
Whatever the hell you want.
Yeah. So Eric Waite, you probably see him there. He's a sommelier as well. He's huge into wine, whiskey and wine. He actually has 2 channels: one that he reviews whiskey and one that he reviews wine. And so it's interesting to usually see his kind of comparable reviews, and he'll bring things. He was just saying a minute ago that he likes to say silky and velvety instead of smooth.
Good man.
I'm sure
I
he's
like
that.
Yeah.
So there was one comment I really wanted to point out. So Jason Coates up at the top, he was saying, what's saltier, OP itself or its fans after the rebrand? Which I spotted that like 5 minutes ago, Jason. I was like, I gotta make sure I reference that.
Jason, it's funny you bring up saltiness, because the Harriet Watt Institute and Old Pulteney kind of got into a tiff over the last few years about describing the whiskey as salty, right? It's the Maritime malt. It's a famous old fishing village, and so everything's about the sea and the ocean and blah blah blah. And what's particularly interesting is Harriet Watt has done the molecular chromatography, right? They've looked physically at the whiskey under a science thing, and they'll tell you
microscope.
Yes, I have no idea what you do molecular chromatography with.
You were talking, and for like the briefest minute, I was like, this is how my wife feels when I talk about what I do. Like I'm the software, right? So I'm just like, whoa. She's like, that's great.
That's great. Cheers, right?
Molecular chromatography. I actually know what that is, but I was not expecting to hear that.
Wasn't expecting that. Okay. So they do it, and there's no salt in the whiskey, right? That there's no sodium that gets into the whiskey.
So what actually produces that flavor?
Yes, right. So that's the fun thing.
Yeah.
And so the writer for the Edinburgh blog, which is like the biggest Scotch blog, the writer for the Edinburgh blog actually was for a while the global brand ambassador for IBHL, and may still be. I haven't been updated, but he went up there and what he discovered was it gets cold enough where you're getting like quite a bit of interaction with the air outside with the whiskey inside.
Okay.
The salt can't actually get through the pores of the wood, but you pick up a bunch of sort of maritime characters, and actually our brain fills in that we should be tasting salt.
Makes sense.
And when I was told that, I stopped tasting the salt. And I don't know if that's because I don't want to, because I know it's not there, or if I've just done some sort of psychological thing. But I don't taste I taste the maritime still, but I still, you get it. You still get that sort of ocean character,
right?
But the saltiness is just totally gone for me.
Well, that makes a lot, like, so if you're smelling the ocean, you're not just smelling salt, you're smelling like, honestly dead fish, and you're smelling like just like grass and stuff in everything near the ocean too. So you're thinking that smells like salt, but it totally doesn't. Yeah, no, that makes it, because if I go smell table salt, it doesn't smell like that.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. So this is why I brought him on. Like, that's kind of obvious, and I never would have thought. You know what I mean? So,
when you get into peated whiskey, one of my favorite things to talk about is what was the peat, right? So if peat is decomposed organic matter, that's basically it's not fully oxidizing, so it's compressing into a fossil fuel. God, more science words, but basically it's dead stuff, right?
Right.
And what that dead stuff is dictates to the type of smoke you get. So when you drink something that's like Benromic or the Anach Cutter Flaughter, those peated Anachs, Benriach, they're using a heather-based peat or highland peat, where it's all dead grass and flowers and stuff like that. So when you burn it, it's this very sort of clean smokiness. Now flip over to Laphroaig, and there are a bunch of other reasons why Laphroaig is very heavy and oily and has a lot to do with the cut points. But Laphroaig and Ardbeg and Lagavulin, they're using a maritime-based peat.
Okay.
So the decomposed organic matter is all dead sea life.
Right.
So not only when you burn it does it make your stuff smoky, but it makes it also taste like the ocean, and you get that saltiness. So what's particularly interesting about Old Pulteney is it's very unique in that it picks up those maritime qualities without
the peat. Yep. Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool.
I think somebody asked. I thought I saw somebody asked what the stills are like.
Yes, I did see that.
I saw that. Yeah. The stills are kind of cool. So the bottle is designed basically to have the big fat boil ball. So the stills do have the big boil ball. But the stills, when they were originally built, didn't really fit in the still house. So they didn't use it's the only distillery that doesn't have a swan neck, had that sort of long, sort of looping swan neck. The wash still has this like funky, it looks like they cut it off at the top and then they stuck just a pipe right into the side.
Didn't they do that because it was too tall or something?
It was too tall, right?
Yeah,
it literally didn't fit in the still house.
That's right. Yeah, I remember because I did talk about that a little bit with the 1983.
With the 1983. Yeah. And then the spirit still has like, it looks like this, but then it curls back down and has this weird sort of right angle to it. And what I've been told, and again, I told you before this, that like, I basically go fishing for rumors and hearsay and like what will the distillers tell me when I've gotten them a little drunk, and what I've been told is that there's a lot of oiliness because of those sort of weird bends and angles, because it doesn't reflux back down.
Right.
So like Tom and Tool is really funny because it's not the tallest still. Glenmorangie is technically the tallest still, but Tom and Tool has a line arm that points straight up, so it's essentially a gigantic still. Because you get the same effect, right? The reflux back down.
Okay. So Glenmorangie would be getting a lot of reflux coming back down.
You're getting tons of reflux,
makes
right?
Sense, because it's just never quite getting to the top. Yeah, okay. That's cool. Awesome. Right.
Should we continue on?
I'm empty, yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm not empty, but I'm about to be.
That's all right. I'm letting you talk, so I'm just drinking while you're entertaining my audience.
All right.
That's all right.
All right, let's jump into the Huddart. Now, you want me to switch this out? Or you want me to just put them all right next to it?
I'll bring them over here.
So I want to apologize to everybody. This sample bottle was sent to me from the UK, and I've been drinking it and sampling people on it, and my new sample bottles haven't arrived. So I got this really ugly, like 1/10 full bottle. The whiskey's still good though.
So feel free to switch out your glass. So this is something I was telling you guys about with just having whiskey glasses and whatnot. I always like to have just a ton of them, right? Because I like to drink new whiskeys out of new glasses. Totally won't really matter, especially if you clean it out with some water, but it just feels...
How much do you like to pour yourself?
That's good. Yeah.
I used to go to this guy's house, and he'd want to taste 20 whiskeys, but he'd pour yours, and it would be up here. And I just started in state of rule where, like, I pour my own. All right.
Sorry, guys. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm just, like, trying not to cough.
No worries. Makes smelling this going to... makes smelling everything a little trickier.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Oh
yeah, that's a lot. That's definitely a no-age statement.
Yeah, no-age statement, right? You get that like
it's like grainy,
a little bit grainy and a little bit
new.
that vapor, that new make vapor to it.
Yeah.
But what's cool about this is it's aged in ex-bourbon barrels, and then it's aged in heavily peated barrels. I haven't been told where those barrels come from, but IBHL owns Knockdhu, Ball Blair, Old Pulteney, and Speyburn, and they never make peated Ball Blairs, they never make peated Speyburns, and they never make peated Old Pulteneys.
Okay. Yep.
So right, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to guess where they're getting those barrels from.
Yeah. I always find that funny when they hide it, but it's like really obvious.
Oh God, I get into this with everyone. I I've done a few things where I've done interviews with some distillers and I've written some stuff and then I send it to them. They're like, can you take this, and this out? And I'm like, God, anybody can do the math and tell you how many barrels are in your warehouses. Anyway, I digress. The fun thing about this Huddart was basically they made the 1989 that came out a few years ago. It's like a 27 year.
Okay.
And it won a bunch of big awards, and supposedly it was an accident. They didn't mean to they didn't mean to transfer it into peated barrels, but they did, and then it came out great, and everybody loved it. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to riff off that, but of course they didn't have a bunch of 27-year-old whiskey lying around.
Yeah.
And so they've sort of replaced the Navigator with this, where there's a smoky component to Old Pulteney. Now, what I'm really curious about for you is I find this to be smokier on the nose than on the palate.
Okay. Well, let's
give it a try.
Cheers.
Slangeva.
I'm the opposite here. Yeah.
Somebody's got the campfire open.
Okay.
I took the campfire to a New Year's party 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that nobody else at that New Year's party drank.
Oh yeah, that wouldn't be
whiskey.
one to start people on.
And I got I woke up the next day and there was about this much whiskey left in the bottle, and I had the worst hangover I've literally ever had. And I came down and I said, "Wow, we did a number on that bottle." And they go, "No, you did a number on the bottle." It's like one of the only whiskeys I can't drink anymore. You know, people have those stories like, "Oh, I drank Dad's Tanqueray and I can't drink gin." It's like campfire is my like, which is a shame because I loved it when I first had it. Mm-hmm. And Perkins went through 600 iterations to design that whiskey.
Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah, no,
trust me, that's like ridiculous.
I have a friend, Priscilla, who cannot drink tequila anymore after what I did to her. So just way too many margaritas and shots. It was just, it's good stuff. So by the way, just for anybody who's come in, this is Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick.
So Nick is a whiskey
geek.
It's a good word for it.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to have him on. As you can tell, he's got some good knowledge, some good words.
Some good words. Big science words.
Some science.
Yeah. Makes you sound smarter than you are. Somebody asked me the other day what a congener is, right? Because I was talking about congeners or congeners, sometimes people say. Okay. They're like, oh, yeah, you go to a distillery, and they're like, oh, we get these, this is where we get all the congeners, And somebody was trying to get me to describe it, and I was going through, and I couldn't really do it. And I think I looked up on Whiskey Advocate. They said a congener is any organic, non-alcoholic compound that's produced during fermentation. Okay. And I was like, that still doesn't really mean anything to me. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I just described it as it's the fancy word for flavor. Right? It's we've got all these fancy flavors, right? Okay, great. Makes sense.
Congener. I actually don't think I've ever even heard that word.
Yeah, it's when they talk about esters and aldehydes and the ketones and all the things that are made during all the different processes.
Heard of all of those? Maybe I read it.
They'll just sort of, a lot of times you'll hear them just grouped into congener. It's like, oh yeah, we make all these congeners.
Okay. Yeah, I gotta say I'm not loving this one as much.
Oh,
I know. It's not bad though. It's really not. It's I guess I tend to have a thing against no age statement whiskeys though.
So do I.
Yeah. It's more, I like that they're trying something new, but it often feels like a money grab to me. But I don't know. I think it depends on the distillery too.
Very few non-age statement whiskeys have been very successful so far.
Yeah.
And there's an irony to that because like Europe has done very well with non-age statement whiskeys, and the U.S. market basically has been. Like it's been pounded into the U.S. market that age equals quality for like 40 years.
Yeah.
People don't realize that the single malt category is a very young category. The first OB, the first official bottling that was regularly produced was the Glenfiddich 12-year, and that was back in 1963.
Okay. Yeah. That's
really people that these distillers. Oh yeah, right. This one's. Was founded in 1826. Well, they haven't been making this since 1826. They've been making stuff that's been going into blends, right? So when Johnny Walker's parent company, which at the time I believe was DCL, before Diageo was Diageo, when they bought 18 distilleries so that they would have a continuous supply for Johnny Walker, when there was that huge sort of whiskey trough in the 80s, they basically were sitting on all of this aged stock of single malt. And so they started this massive marketing campaign that age equals quality, age equals quality. And you can actually see old movies where like they'll drop in a line and be like, that's an 18-year-old Scotch. You know what I mean?
Right.
And they're like, and it's just been beaten into us that age equals quality.
Yep.
And now they've run out of old stock. And so now everybody's like, you go to a distillery, they're like, oh, it's really not about the age. It's really about the blending. It's like, all right, man, which one is it?
Yeah, that's funny. So somebody's asking, because you kind of led this, what's a good non-age statement whiskey? I'll start one, although it's kind of cheating. So the Four Roses single barrel small batch select, technically a no age statement, but it's 6 or 7 years and it's really
right. That's and bourbon does better younger.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Bourbon does a little bit better younger, particularly because you have that hot climate, so it's extractive and it's working a little faster.
Yeah. We kind of get beat down by no age statements in this country, though. You know, just everybody and their brother trying to start a distillery.
Yeah.
Or
I got
start
one
a
for
distillery.
you. Ardbeg Supernova.
Okay.
Technically a non-age statement,
Okay.
and that is a killer dram.
Yeah. I actually just had that for the first time the other day.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I just reopened that. The really interesting thing with the peated whiskeys, you see a lot of pretty good peated non-age statement whiskeys, and you look at something like Lafroig. The last like 20 Lafroigs and Ardbegs that have come out are all non-age statement, right? And one thing you'll notice is they're always in green bottles.
Okay. Yep.
So why is peated whiskey always in green bottles? Well, they have this huge problem, right? So we were talking about economics and the marketing and how that affects what we drink. So you've got you basically, like, ppms is a really stupid measurement. So
right.
like people measure phenols and you're like, that's like the dumbest thing ever, because you measure it on the barley and you lose a different amount based on so many different things. And in particular, how old is it, right? The older the whiskey, the fewer the ppms are left. So technically the Lafroig 10-year and the Lafroig 32-year are the same ppms. Well, that's absurd, right? Because you taste them side by side, and the 32-year's got this like gentle like sea breeze smoke left, and the 10 years like boom, right in the face.
It's almost like
you're getting curb stomped by you ever watch Scooby-Doo and they always had those weird monsters that were always running around, like that's what I think of Lafroig whenever I drink Lafroig. But interesting.
I'm sure that makes sense to you.
Makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. But basically, so why are they always in green bottles, right? Well, it's because they don't want to add a boatload of caramel coloring because they want to be able to say it's natural coloring.
I had a feeling that's where you're going.
Right? But they don't want to age it for a long time because they'll age all the phenols out of it.
Right.
So they have to make it relatively young. And so there are a bunch of these like Lafroigs and Ardbegs that are quite young, that are quite good. But you'll always find them never in a clear bottle, always in a green bottle.
I don't know what that. I get it. He's trying to. Nick dropping
Whiskey John. Whiskey John.
Man, let me tell you, before we even turned on the camera, like, he just started going, and I was like, no, save it for the stream. You got to talk to them about the whiskey barrels, because that's going to blow their mind, actually.
Which part about the whiskey barrels?
So about the expansion and contraction. That was totally just new to me.
All right, so like so we were talking about before we were talking, just to give a little context, we were talking about how like you get told all of these things that are basically that are adopted across the industry, and then they're just accepted as facts. And then somebody will come in, a distiller or something will come in and say, that's absolute nonsense. And so the most recent time that happened to me, and then once it processed, it was one of those just aha moments, was when you go down to Kentucky and you do distillery tour, they say the temperature variation we get when it's cold, the cask squeezes the whiskey into the wood, and then it gets hot and it expands, and that variation is what causes all our flavor, right? It's that squeeze, the expansion. It's squeezing the whiskey into the wood, and they'll take a stave and they'll show you the red layer, and they'll say when it gets cold, that whiskey squeezes and it goes past that red layer of caramelized sugar, and that's where we get all the caramelized sugar flavors. Richard Seeley, who's the owner of Foursquare Rum in Barbados, right? He was doing a tasting at Norfolk earlier this year. And he goes, yeah, you know that thing they tell you down in Kentucky? And he just goes, that's complete bull, and he just loses his mind. I was like, what are you talking about? And he says, when it's hotter, the wood is more extractive, and that's where you're getting more color and flavor. When it's colder, it's just less interactive, and that's it. And he was like, there's no science. Now, I don't know who to believe, because I have heard, right? Like, I've heard from extremely reputable industry experts that the barrel squeezing and expanding is where all that flavor is getting from. But what about places like Taiwan and India, where they're making Amrut and Kavalan, or Kavalan and Amrut, right? The temperature is always hot.
Right.
But those barrels age, and they not age, but they're extraordinarily extractive in 2 years. They're getting no temperature variation, right? So obviously it doesn't matter there. It's just the heat.
Yeah.
So I it's like, what do you believe?
Yeah. And I know, like, in India, a lot of their distilleries are actually underground to even, so that the heat doesn't even matter.
Yep.
You know, so like you said, but I'd be very interested to know if there's been like a white paper on that. You know, like just somebody who actually did just an unbiased, does this even actually happen?
If I'll tell you this, if you live in Massachusetts and you ever get a chance to go to Ipswich and meet Maggie Campbell at Privateer, she will spend 3 hours with you going over the science, and she's actually rewritten huge portions of the W set for the spirits part of, like, the sommelier W set. Yeah. And she took me through some of these things, and it was just like, and I tend to believe, like, Maggie or Matt Hoffman, because they'll sit you down and just go, this is exactly what the science is. And you don't have to be like a good scientist. Like, I'm not a great scientist, but if it logically makes sense and they're saying this is it and this is the sort of the chemistry of it, then I start to trust it. What I don't trust is when you go into a distillery and you say, hey, why do you put it in at 63.5%? And they say, oh, because that's the best filling for a good flavor. Right. And you're hearing that at every distillery. Right. And it's like, no, it's so that when they trade barrels, they don't have to pay the difference in taxes. Right? It's like
damn it. Stupid marketing people.
Yes, stupid marketing people. And by the way, the distillers, I shouldn't say this, but the distillers hate their marketing teams so often. It's really funny because they're just like, oh God. Yeah. You know, what are we actually telling our consumers here?
So Eric's saying several of his whiskey books have conflicting information about factors such as the flavor variances with strains of barley and whether or not the water makes a difference. Yeah. I mean, I think there's just no real, you're never going to get the real evidence from a company that's not unbiased. You know what I mean? Like, that makes sense.
And one of the challenges, it was Eric who asked that question. Good. I love that question, Eric. And Eric, one of the challenges that you have is a lot of the writers go and talk to brand ambassadors, and the brand ambassadors are hearing it from the distillery managers that these are the components, these are the factors, and then they're just regurgitating that, and then the writers take that as fact. I remember I read the first whiskey book I ever read was Whisky. I think it was World of Whisky, Whisky, the Definitive World Guide by Michael Jackson. It was published in 2000. And the first 4 sections were about water and grain and all this thing. And then he got to the barrel and he basically said, everything I just told you is probably BS. And I was like, wait, what? And he was like, it probably contributes 1% flavor. And here's what I'll tell you in terms of the grain and the water. I don't really believe that the water is impacting it very much, and nothing I've ever heard says that the water really impacts it very much. The grain would impact it if they weren't all using the same grain. Right. And you know that because of Westland. You straight up know that because Westland, if you go drink their stuff, if you go drink their new make, and I've had the pleasure of tasting a bunch of different new makes, if you taste Westland new make, it's way different. And they use 5 different barley strains, and they treat them differently. They tumble roast it. And what it does is it kills yield. Okay. And the fact of the matter is, because so much single malt Scotch is going into blends, again, they have to worry a lot about efficiency. And so the grain and the yeast have been bred to maximize sugar content in the grain, and therefore the yeast is as efficient as humanly possible consuming that sugar to make as high an ABV beer as they can. Right. Because the higher the ABV beer, when you strip out everything else, you're left with more alcohol. And their number one cost is fuel, is the cost of heating the still. Really? Right? So that's the number one, oil prices affect it more than anything, that makes sense, right? Yeah. And so they want to be as efficient as humanly possible. So yeah, and when you talk to distillers, they're like, they give you the company line, and you keep sort of pointing this out, and then finally they're like, well, we can control the flavor in a bunch of other ways, so we don't worry about it. And you're like, wait, that was like literally the postscript of those goofy radio ads, where they're like, and precipitation much better.
So Eric's actually saying, never mind. I thought Eric was challenging you a little bit. He's saying they're not actually using the same barley strains, but he says, but the parenting of the strains are mostly the same.
Oh, so, fantastic.
Yeah. So
yeah,
like I said, Eric's
a
smart guy.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Him and I usually sport the same haircut, although he grew a beard recently, so it's
interesting.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah,
he's less aerodynamic than I am.
I know the other thing that distilleries will tell you is distilleries make it seem like the process is always the same, like it's always exactly the same, and they're never doing anything differently, and that's because there's a huge concern that people will believe that one bottle that they bought is like a bad bottle, and they don't want people being like, oh, X and so single malt used to be better.
Yes.
So they want you to feel like it's always been the same. But like when I was talking to I think it was Glenn Farkless. When I was at Glenn Farkless, they were saying, everybody says we always get this ratio of grain when we're putting it through the mill. And he was like, sometimes we're using concerto, sometimes we're using optic, and it changes based on what's a good crop and so on and so forth. So I am speaking in generalities when I say they're all using the same grain. I just mean that they're not using grain as a flavor component. They're trying to pick the grain that is increasing and maximizing yield.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That makes sense. Actually, kind of like tangential here, but one thing I'm loving that bourbons are doing, or just American whiskeys in general, is the experimentation with different kinds of grains.
Yep.
So like Iron Root is one that most of these guys know very well. They are just like, they need to go home, they're drunk kind of thing. Trying to using I think it's like blood corn and like some sort of purple corn and like all different kinds of weird grains. I always talk about this. Like, I know everything there is to know about the distillery that I'm reviewing that week, and then it just
then it goes.
Yeah, because it's like doing a book report kind of. So, but like they have a lot of weird things, and as I'm reviewing a lot of these kind of up and coming distilleries, they often have something that they're doing that's different, and it's unfortunate because that's usually where they don't make any money, because if it comes out really good, they still haven't made enough of a yield to really make a ton of money off of it and bring it to market.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, so it's a little tough. I am dying for that 50.
All right, let's hit it.
So.
New glass, I'm getting better at this. Yeah, it's funny you say that because the people always assume that like a craft whiskey is going to be a quote unquote better whiskey.
Yep.
But a lot of times they're doing experiments where it's going to take years for them really to figure out how it turns out. And then it's like, oh, we just spent the last 6 years thinking this would work, and it doesn't.
And it's terrible. And we've got all this stock.
We've got all this stock. And what are they going to do? Not sell it? They're already in the hole.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Damned if you don't.
Lose all the money, or you kind of kill your reputation.
Right, or you kill your reputation. Exactly.
So, Gregor, I have not tried the Wonderback American Single Malt yet. So, are you more of a Scotch guy? You seem like more of a Scotch guy.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Not because I dislike bourbon in any way, shape, or form. Just to clarify, but the thing I really like, I particularly like single malt Scotch, and there's, in my opinion, just a greater diversity of flavor.
Yeah.
And it really has, I mean, honestly, it has a lot to do with the barrel laws for bourbon.
Okay.
Having to use new oak no matter what.
Yeah.
And then of course they're also usually doing a stripping run. Whereas in single malt, they're just, the size and shape of the still dictates so much to the flavors you're getting that you get these very unique characteristics. And whether you're really in the mood for peat, whether you're really in the mood for a sherry bomb, whether you're in the mood for young, old, whatever your sort of mood is for single malt, there's a whole category that has this whole diversity of flavor within it.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for bourbon to keep my attention. That being said, I love the taste, and I think there's a slight difference because like I like it from it's like Johnny Walker, right? People ask me about Johnny Walker all the time, and I'll be doing a single malt tasting. Someone will go, you just hated on Johnny Walker, and Johnny Walker's a great whiskey, and okay, it's not that Johnny Walker is a bad tasting whiskey.
Right.
I just have no clue what's in it.
Right.
So like, how can I get that excited about it? And that realization for me was, I was like, oh, it's really cool to drink Old Pulteney, and then you drink a signatory Old Pulteney that's done differently. You drink a Gordon MacPhail Old Pulteney that's done differently. You drink an Old Pulteney done by Old Pulteney that's done differently. And you're like, this is the backbone of what they do, but this is how they've sort of done some variation on it, and I love that. And I just don't get that as much with bourbon.
Okay. Yeah.
I hope I don't offend any bourbon drinkers out there.
Not at all. Gregor really, really wants. So I have the Power Glove, like the old Nintendo Power Glove, and I wear it quite often on the stream. He's brought it up like 17. I'm seeing it every time, Gregor.
What is the Power Glove?
I don't even remember why I started wearing it. It was somebody I was talking. Very, very rarely I'll talk about video games on here because it's just something else I'm like pretty passionate about. And I mentioned, somebody was like, hey, do you have any like old stuff? And I was like, well, I got an NES. Do you have the Power Glove? I do have and I ran downstairs and I went and got it. And then I just kind of wear that now.
Oh, man. So, I love it. Yeah, I did.
Very hard to hold a Glencairn while you have the Power Glove.
While you have the Power Glove?
Yeah.
It's really funny because I did I was doing the Whisky of the Day, which we just started doing on our Instagram.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Terrible at social media, right? But
I think most of us are.
At Taylor Whiskey. Yeah, there you go. I'm doing a shameless plug. But I did
It'll be in the description below.
Oh, great. Hey, thank you. No. I did the Ardbeg roller coaster next to the Ardbeg Supernova.
Oh, cool.
And I was describing the two of them, and I said that the Ardbeg Supernova was the Goliath Online of peaty Scotch, and literally for like 3 days no one got it, and then somebody was like Starcraft, and I was like, yes, thank you, like good lord, how is it? I thought we had like I just thought there was a nice parallel between Whiskey Geeks and like video games, right? It just feels like they have some nice crossover.
You would think so. There's sometimes there is. It depends.
It depends, right? Yeah. Oh man. So it's really fun.
Yeah, we had this 15 before the stream started. This was how we started our night, like I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. I liked this one a lot.
I love the stuff.
This is. I mean, we only really tried the no age statement in the 12 so far, but this is I think where it starts taking off. Like
so
really.
For me, this starts to bring me back to the 17 and the 21, which when the 17 and the 21 went away, I was like genuinely heartbroken and kind of didn't want to work with Old Pulteney anymore because like it was just, they were my absolute favorites, and then they brought these and I was like, you just imagine me, I was in Wick, I was literally in the distillery, and I was like, what's this? You know what I mean? I was really skeptical. And then they were awesome. The big difference for anybody who loves the 17 was just my go-to, and the 17 was a what we call like a distiller's dram, which is basically like distillers don't actually drink the mainstream products. They drink a lot of Kleinlich, they drink a lot of Mortlach, they drink a lot of Springbank, and like I'm sure Springbank for a lot of you, since you're following a whiskey stream, is like pretty regular stuff. But for like the masses, Springbank is consumed way less than Glenfiddich.
I was gonna say, like a lot of them, especially in the Discord, which is like a chat program. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like a chat program I have. They'll often highlight when they go by a Springbank. Like that's an event,
right?
Springbank,
any
Springbank.
Right.
Springbank 12 even is just like.
I will tell you, one of the pleasant things of working in retail, particularly if you work at like a place like Gordon's where I used to work, is when a bunch of new stuff gets released. Yeah. If you're a big enough account, they come and taste you on all of it. Okay. And when those Springbank single casts used to come out, and like 10 of them would drop at once. Okay. Yeah. They'd come and pour all 10 for me. Man. And you're just like, and by the way, they do it at 10 a.m. and then they expect you to work for the rest of the day. Yeah. It's like, what are we going to do?
See, I could manage that part. I would feel like I'd get through 3 and then I'd be like, okay, the rest of it's kind of a
wash. Yeah.
Like, unless they're giving it to you in an extremely specific order where you can make that work. So, question for you.
Yeah, go.
Highland Park 18 or 25?
Ooh, strong question. 25. 25 for me. I love the 18. And people I've been asked like, what's your desert island dram? Okay. And like for a long time, Highland Park 18 was just a desert island whiskey for me. Yeah. Because it just services every mood that I have. But I actually like very distinctly remember the first time I had a Highland Park 25, and I was like,
yeah. I have not tried that.
What am I drinking? I was like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. The sort of come to God whiskey drinking moment for me was actually the first whiskey that I ever spent more than $50 on was Glendronach 15.
Okay.
And the old revival, not the new revival, that like the old one used to be all Oloroso, and it was because of like the gap where they stopped distilling from 96 to 2002. It was really old whiskey.
Yeah.
Even though it was a quote unquote 15 year.
Yeah.
That was like, and that became my desert island whiskey for a long time. So, but I got to tell you, the 25 just.
They have one at Total Wine in Shrewsbury.
They have just the old Oloroso one sitting around?
Actually, that's a good question. I asked them.
Because they have they replaced it with the new stuff, which is Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez.
Okay.
And it leads me to believe that when Brown-Forman bought it, or maybe even before that, they really have been pushing to do more and more in PX, which is just PX tends to be a little softer and a little sweeter.
Yeah.
I just like PX is fine, but like real heavy dry Oloroso sherry is just totally for me.
So Steve, I appreciate that. You should keep working that angle, and Matt, pay attention to Steve. He's trying to get me a sample of the 25.
Oh man, I feel that. But back to the 15 for a second. When I had this, I was like, oh man. But the big difference between this and I would say the 17, which this is technically replacing, is this is a little bit brighter and a little bit fruitier than the 17 is got that like that maple syrupiness to it, that whiskey where you're just like, oh, am I drinking this or eating it? You know what I mean? And the 15's a little bit like livelier and zestier and brighter.
Yep.
It's aged really interestingly in second fill ex-bourbon barrels and then transferred into first fill Oloroso sherry butts.
Okay.
And I was just like,
yeah, I could see that.
And what's particularly cool about Old Pulteney is it's one of the few distilleries, maybe the only one. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it's the only one that. No, I'm wrong. Is one of the only distilleries that has an actual rick house, as well as the dunnage warehousing.
Okay.
And I think they really need that because it's one of the few places in Scotland that actually gets genuinely cold. So they've told me that like their angel share is actually like 1/4 to 0.5%, whereas the average in Scotland's 1.5%. Although I've been told that nice. 1.5% is actually people drinking so much of it.
I could see.
And but it's intriguing because they have those big rick houses and you get a little bit more interaction. And I was skimming the internet and I found that their filling strength is higher. And so I think they're actually trying to make up for it being a little colder, and they really need it to be more extractive. Otherwise, it would just be you wouldn't be getting much. You wouldn't be getting much wood impact.
Okay.
So what's cool about this is like this is second fill bourbon aged in and then transferred into first fill Oloroso sherry butts. Yeah. And what people don't realize is most of the color when you add it into a sherry butt happens in the first like 2 years that it's in there.
Makes sense.
Right. It happens. The extraction happens very quickly. But you'll notice. Like this is natural color,
right?
This is first fill Oloroso Spanish oak, right? This isn't that crap where it's American oak that's been sent over to a sherry bodega and then they put sherry in it so that the distillery can load it up with caramel color and call it sherry.
Hold up the Huddart. I know it's like.
I'm sorry.
No, I know
it's so bad.
Just tilt it; it'll show off well. But just to give you a
comparison.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
You can see it. It's definitely there, but you would think first fill Oloroso sherry butt that this would actually get dark like Glendronach.
Right.
And it really doesn't. But it's there on the nose, which makes me happy.
Yeah, this I like this one a lot. This would be, how much is a bottle of this typically?
It's a great question. Under 100.
Under 100, okay.
And I think you're going to see it
like 90?
sort of 90-ish. If you're going somewhere where they're buying a ton of it, maybe it's a little cheaper.
By the way, if any of you guys have questions for Nick, he's... Yeah. Actually, so funny thing. Do you remember you were telling that story about... what was it? It was the... Shoot. Had to do with 40 Creek, I believe. And their... no.
Wouldn't have been 40 Creek.
No, it wasn't 40 Creek.
I don't know anything about 40 Creek.
It was, you were talking about taking part, like a certain part of the tree.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what it was.
Yeah.
I ended up telling that story on a stream like 2 nights later.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? The top part of the tree versus the bottom part of the tree.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
So if you ever see there was a I'll keep going. Just keep riffing. So if you ever see Cooper's Select or Cooper's Reserve on a bourbon barrel, a bottle of bourbon, what they're talking about is using the bottom part of the tree and the core of it. And basically, a tree doesn't grow at the same rate that we do, right? A tree, like my head's just as old as my feet, right? That's not the case with a tree, presumably. But the top part of a tree is actually much younger than the bottom part of the tree. And when Buffalo Trace did the Single Oak Project, they discovered that they basically cut 192 trees in half and made staves from the top half and the bottom half, and they treated the wood in all different ways and blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they discovered was bottom part of the tree makes much better whiskey. Okay. Which I find just totally fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eric was saying, I totally missed this. Thank you, Eric, for the super chat, by the way. So my favorite Old Pulteney I tasted at the distillery was the 15, especially for the price. Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite Old Pulteney?
Yeah. Sounds like the 17 to me, or maybe
the 17 was my favorite. I love the 21. It almost kind of ruined it for me when Jim Murray named it the whiskey of the world. That sucked because
everything that he names that it's like, oh good, I can't wait to never find this
again.
You
can't find it ever again. It totally messed up it totally messed up what stocks they had available. Yeah. Like it was basically like Yamazaki and all Japanese whiskey has just been totally screwed by Jim Murray. Oh man, right?
Yamazaki 12, actually the 18 specifically though. Oh my god, have you tried the 18?
I have.
Oh, yes. It's so good. I would imagine.
I have some crazy stories about Japanese whiskey. Yeah. I went to Japan and I went to all the distilleries in Japan that were making whiskey a couple years ago, and it was awesome.
There can't be that many. What, like 9?
9. Yeah. There may be a new one that's been built recently, but when I went, there were 9. The 17 has historically been my favorite. Mm-hmm. I have a new favorite. I tried it for the first time last night, and I'm excited to talk about it a little later.
Oh yeah, interesting.
Interesting.
I wonder what that could be.
I wonder what he's talking about.
I don't know. Maybe slightly off camera.
Yeah, maybe slightly off camera. Might be off in the distance over to my right. Oh man,
awesome. Yeah, this one's great. For anybody who might be looking to get into Old Pulteney, I think this would be the one I would buy. I would go out and spend the money.
Go spend the money on the 15. Yeah. If you're new to Old Pulteney, I think the 15's. Yeah. What I would do is come to a tasting.
Yeah, well, that's too.
That was the other thing why I started doing this was because it's just like I remember the first bottle that really disappointed me that I had spent a fair bit of money on, which was a Dalmore.
Which one?
It was the
18.
It was the Dalmore 18.
Yeah.
And Dalmore, I hate to dog any distilleries, but go take Dalmore at a store and just take all the bottles out, and you'll notice something weird. No matter how old it is, they're all the same color, mm-hmm. right? And it's just like, that really threw me off.
Yeah.
And I remember tasting it, and I was huge into it. I just had the Glendronach 15. Mm-hmm. It had been such like a world-changing experience. Yeah. I was reading one of those tiny little guide to single malt books that Michael Jackson used to do, mm-hmm. and he was like, go get the 15. This one's off the chain, right? And I went and got it. I bought it at this little shop, and I went back, and I was like, I love this Glendronach. And the guy was like, well, you're going to love the Dalmore 18. Oh. And he was trying to lead me down the sherry cask thing, right?
Makes sense.
It made sense, and I don't blame the guy. But I remember I bought it, I took it home, and I could not finish it. Really? I disliked it so much. I served it for all my friends I didn't like.
I ended up, I tried it at, so Jordan Zimmerman, who recently actually left Dalmore, she did a thing at Julio's a few weeks after you did. And she brought Dalmore and gave me a 12 and a portwood finish, mm-hmm. and I actually like both of those. Yep. But it's exactly like you described. I mean, it's like sherry and whiskey.
It's a shame because it's a great distillate. Actually, there was people may remember this, but 80 Rattray used to come out with those 375s, mm-hmm. and they had a 14-year-old Dalmore that came out maybe 8 years ago, something like that, and they did their own casking, and it was totally like light colored, and I was like, oh, I'm curious about this, and I had it and I loved it. And when the Patriots lost in the Super Bowl in heartbreaking fashion, I just crushed an entire bottle of it.
That didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Let's not talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So I forgot, the reason I brought that up was that same night we actually tried the King Alexander the third, right? That's what it's called. Yeah. And then the 18, the the 15. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. Yeah.
And then the port would finish in the 12.
Yeah.
And I remember the 18 being my least favorite of all of those.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And now it's super. When I bought it the first time, I bought it for like $100, and now it's like $270. It's $270 of disappointment.
It's funny because she mentioned that. Well, not quite the price, but she was just like, I have the 18, and some of the people that are in that room that know whiskey really well, they were just like, oh man, like we don't even get to ever try this, you know.
Right.
And then we all tried it, and she's like, so what do you guys think of that? And we're like, you know, like, can I have some more of the King Alexander?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Steve, I totally agree with you that I haven't had that particular SMWS one. Well, I don't know which one you're talking about, but I haven't had an SMWS Dalmore recently. Mm-hmm. But I've had some 80 Rattray ones, and they're awesome. And every time I have them, I'm just like, come on, you could be doing this at the distillery. Actually, it's like when Diageo does Mortlocks.
Yep.
Oh, it just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh man, every Gordon MacPhail Mortlock I've ever had, every exclusive malts, everyone, I'm always just like, this is such good raw spirit. You can't screw this up. Mm-hmm. And then I have the OBs, and I'm just like,
DH Silv is saying that he tried the 30-year last weekend, and it was boring, which...
It was boring?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because I just more think to myself, like, the few times I've had a whiskey that old, even if it wasn't, like, so the last drop, right? It's like a 50-year-old whiskey. I tried that. When I tried it, I remember just thinking, like, I don't know what I was expecting, but this wasn't it.
This wasn't it.
Yeah.
Old whiskeys, I would say the best company at doing old whiskeys is Gordon and MacPhail. Okay. And the main reason is because they've been making single malts just longer than everybody else. Okay. Like you have to like think about it. They've actually been aging it to bottle it as a single malt since the freaking 1800s. Yeah. Somebody asked me another one. What is this?
Hold on. This is like the 10-year second fill bourbon cask, so it's essentially new make. Oh, he's just explaining the single malt whiskeys.
Yeah.
So I tried the I'm gonna get the name wrong. Parker something. It was the Curacao.
The Karizawa.
No. It was finished in Curacao. Barrels.
Yeah.
It was Parker's Heritage.
Yep.
Yeah. Have you ever tried that?
I haven't had it.
That was really, really cool. It was like a super interesting flavor, one I've never tried before. But just based off of everything that you've tried, I was like, oh, somebody else had it.
No, I haven't had that one.
I remember when they gave it away, or they sold it as an auction item, I believe. So like, there's not too many bottles out there. But I managed to try some a couple Wednesdays ago, and very, very good stuff.
Yeah, the one of the coolest experiences I've had from a like weird barrel standpoint is talk about Japan. I went to Chichibu. And Chichibu is like a 2-hour train ride outside of Tokyo. Okay. And Chichibu is run by Ichiro Okudo. And Ichiro Okudo's father was I don't know if they actually owned it or not, but they made Hanyu and they made Karizawa, right? So like the Port Ellen and Aurora of Japanese whiskey. And I was there with the global brand ambassador, and we were getting pretty tanked. Yeah. And then all of a sudden Ichiro came in, and the global brand ambassador was like so like rattled, and I was like, what's going on, you know? Yeah. And I was like, oh my god, it's Ichiro Okudo, like this dude's a legend. Yeah. And he was like, do you like my stuff? And I was like, yeah, I love this whiskey. She was like, you want to try some cool stuff? I was like, sure. And they had like it was almost like a piece of cloth that had all these little sample bottles in little pockets, and he pulled the sort of cover off the cloth so you could see all the sample bottles. Yeah. And they were just little, 200 mLs tops, and they were hand labeled what they all were. Yeah. And it was like Karizawa's in Mizunara Oak. You know what I mean? Like, and it was just samples that they had been pulling over the years to have reference points. And I was like, this is the coolest stuff. And it was just all different wood experiments they had done, and
that's so cool.
There is nothing cooler than going into a distiller's lab. Way cooler than a warehouse, because they have like Brent Elliott has 40,000 samples in his lab of stuff that they've done forever. I went in there, and they were like, he was like, you want to try something really cool? And when a distiller asks you like, do you want to try something really cool? You know what
honestly,
I mean?
If anybody asked me,
do you want to try it? Right. Yeah. And he was like, do you want to try something really cool? And I was like, sure. Like, what's up? And he was like, when we went from the old systems where the barrel and then it just had a number written on it to the barcode systems, he was like, we lost a couple barrels. And I was like, excuse me?
Right.
He's like, yeah, we lost track of a couple barrels. And so he has what's now like 28-year-old Four Roses barrels.
Okay.
Like 3 of them that they won't ever do anything with because
Right.
it's so outside their profile.
Yeah.
And he's just like, yeah, we've been pulling samples for a while. You want to just try what Four Roses tastes like at like 27 years old?
That's really cool.
I was like, are you kidding me?
That's awesome.
It was awesome.
Oh, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that, especially coming right off of the small batch select, I'm just
Yeah.
like, it's been a while since I've even had Four Roses, and never mind review it or on the channel or whatever. I think it's honestly been like a couple of years.
Yep.
And then I just jumped back into this one because they obviously kind of just released it. And it just reminded me, I was like, oh yeah, I really like Four Roses.
I really love Four
Yeah,
Roses.
yeah.
Yeah. I think I was supposed to be doing an Old Pulteney thing, but I did the coolest sort of content thing I ever did was I interviewed Brent for like an extended period of time on how the process of making SBLE, the small batch limited editions, are. Mm-hmm. And it's absurd, right? They basically have a range, they've got hundreds of thousands of barrels. They've got a range of ones that are at the appropriate age. And the way they do their barreling is they barrel each recipe and they put them into sections of the warehouse. So they're not spreading the barrels all around from each batch, right? So they've got a batch in this warehouse in this corner, right? And then they got a batch up here in this corner.
Right.
And so there are, hundreds and hundreds of batches that are the appropriate age. Mm-hmm. And they go through and they start tasting all of them and they find the ones that they decide are mature enough. Mm-hmm. Then he's got 150 test batches. And then he starts trying to think in his head what he wants to create. Then he starts going through the test batches and figuring out like where the flavors are going to come from.
So bizarre.
And yeah, like the stuff he's doing in his head, he says it takes him 4 months, and they basically go through and it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And he's like, when we're really successful, we actually only have to do like 20 test batches. Yeah. But when they did the 2014, they did 120 test batches, and they almost didn't get it in time.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was really cool.
Yeah. So real quick. For the chat, what are you guys currently on?
What's everybody drinking?
They're normally on like maybe their third, maybe fourth drink by now. So,
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to this is the 15 still, right?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. So
should we move to the 18?
Absolutely. Yeah. I know I feel like I'm making you kick them back, but this is entertaining for me.
No. I'm chatty.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're as my brother would say, don't get them started. Won't stop.
No, live stream is a good place to be chatty.
Live stream, I guess, is the right place to be chatty.
Okay. So Steve is drinking the OP21.
I love you, Steve.
Yeah.
Get after it.
Yeah, Steve's a good guy. He's got a lot of good stuff too.
Oh, Buna 12.
Yeah.
Big fan.
Yeah.
Buna 18 was like one of my go-tos for a really long time. I still pull that out. Buna is really cool. One thing you'll notice about Bunahaben is it's 46.3%. And it has to do with non-chill filtration. And it has to do with when they measure the ABV, they have 0.3% error. And apparently at 46%, if you non-chill filter, the oils won't precipitate because there's a high enough ratio of alcohol to water.
Okay.
So they do it at 46.3 so that even if it was
just slightly over.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have that's what the distillery
really cool.
manager told me on this tour.
Okay.
So that can be nonsense, but that was what I was told, which I think is kind of cool.
If you had to take a rough guess, how many distilleries have you toured?
In Scotland or everywhere?
Just everywhere.
Well over 100.
Well over
100.
That sounds wonderful.
I've been to about 70 in Scotland. I've been to.
Did you just live in Scotland for a while, or did you just travel?
When I got into whiskey and I was trying to learn about whiskey and I was reading these books that were having all this contradictory information that somebody mentioned early on. My dad's friend was like, you really want to get into the whiskey industry, get off your ass and get it to Scotland. Okay. And I was like, all right. So I, with no plan, landed in Scotland. I booked a flight for October 1st and a flight back for October 31st. And I went there for 30 days and I did 40 distilleries hitchhiking, which was awesome.
Man, that's wonderful.
Just like I was literally too young to rent a car.
What's better than a drunk hitchhiker?
Right. Actually, the Scots are incredibly cool in general. Like I got picked up on my way down to Campbelltown, and it was amazing. The guy was just like, I was literally gonna have to sleep in a just like a bus terminal, and the guy was like, "What are you doing? Cop in." I was like, "All right, I love Scotch."
That's really awesome.
But then I've been back a bunch of times, and I've done I led a trip or two, and then my brother and I went back and we hit. So we've just a couple trips, and you hit a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And then I've been to 30 or 40 in the U.S. and I've been to 10 and I've been to like 6 in Ireland.
Okay. So what do you think of the proper 12? best whiskey to come out of
Best
Ireland
whiskey
in years.
I've had, yeah. Irish whiskey's it's really funny because people are like, Irish whiskey is the fastest growing category. It's like, well, yeah, they did 9 million 9-liter cases last year, and Johnny Walker did 22 million on its own, right?
Yeah. Also, it's if you think of percentage, if you've got like 10 distilleries and you double it, that's a hell of an improvement.
Yeah, that's a hell of an improvement.
Still only 10 new distilleries. The proper 12 is my most popular video by 2.5 times. It's almost 600,000 views.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I have several videos that are over 200,000, but that one just, honestly, watching that video just take off the way it did was a trip.
It was really fun.
I nailed everything about the timing. Like I got the bottle, I did a review. It was one of the nicer, but still got the point across reviews.
Yeah.
And I put it out on the Wednesday before the fight, which was on a Saturday.
Oh man.
It just
that just killed.
Nailed it.
Yeah, it's amazing how timing's everything, right?
Oh man, like if I put it out a day later, it may have been a whole different story.
Yeah.
So,
that'll do it.
Yeah, that one. Even when I'm done with this channel, eventually, like that'll be a thing I remember.
That'll be a thing you remember. Yeah.
So you're gonna have to help me because of my cold. What am I smelling here? Because
so same exact cask regiment, right?
Yeah.
So they're doing the first 15, 16 years in second fill ex bourbon.
Yep.
And then transferring it into first fill Oloroso sherry butts, right? Spanish oak, real Spanish oak, 46% non-chill filtered, natural coloring. Check. Yep. What's interesting when you start aging whiskey is like there's the oxidative process is really important, right? So like if you ever had Cleveland whiskey, where they're trying to make whiskey in 24 hours.
Okay. I have not.
when you have these whiskeys where they're like trying to do accelerated aging, or if you ever have whiskey that's aged in like a barrel that's this big, so there's so much ratio of wood to liquid. A lot of times it will have the taste and aromas of whiskey, but absolutely none of the texture. Okay. And it's because you can there's ways to accelerate the extractive part where you're actually like pulling out the flavors from the wood, the sugars, the lipids, the lignins, all the different things that are giving it flavor. But one of the most important reactions is the oxidative reaction. It's just like O atoms being introduced to it. And you basically get like the after a bunch of things, like it oxidizes into aldehydes, then carboxylic acids, and then eventually into esters, right? And you'll hear people say like high esters. High esters tends to mean, there are different types of esters, but high esters tends to mean like very fruity and very oily.
Okay.
And you'll notice that that's later on in the progression. So if you ever taste like a really, really good old whiskey that's not over the hill, you'll notice it's got great texture, like unbelievable mouthfeel, really, really long finish because it takes so long to break down on your palate, and these insanely like bright fruit notes. You're like, that's where we're going with this. You're starting to get older and older, and so you're starting to get more of that oily mouth coating effect, but you're also starting to get that like lovely like bright orchard fruit aromas. And this I think is going to be like 130. I would have loved it at like 115. That would have made me a little happier, but they're just it's like a prisoner's dilemma, right? Like one company raises their price and the next is just like, well, we can make $10 more. You know what I mean? It's like,
that's always tough.
It's brutal.
It just ruins it. Yeah. But oily is the first thing that comes to mind when I took a sip here. But
do you think everybody's too drunk for me to get really geeky for a minute?
No, not at all.
All right. So one of the really interesting components about distillation is if you go on like Wikipedia, right, and it like the Scotch whiskeys like Wikipedia, you'll see people like you'll basically see the distillery will have a fermentation time, and they'll usually say, all right, like Old Pulteney's got a 52-hour fermentation. Yeah, but Old Pulteney does 2 fermentations. They do a long and a short.
Okay.
Right, which is what most of these distilleries do. Particularly any distillery that has stainless steel and wooden washbacks, they're doing a long fermentation in the wooden washbacks, and they're doing their short fermentation in the stainless steel. And it takes about 50 hours-ish, 48 to 52 hours, for all of the sugar to be consumed by the yeast.
Makes sense. You can only make that go so fast.
Right, yeah. So after 50 hours, they're not increasing alcohol. And I talked in the very beginning of this whole thing about like efficiency, right? So why the hell would they do a 100-hour fermentation or like a long fermentation?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that happens is you have what's called autolysis, where the yeast, when it runs out of sugar, it starts basically losing the fight against the localized bacteria, and it starts self-destructing. And in the process, it releases all of these different compounds, these like really meaty, interesting compounds. And in beer, that's actually considered like you effed up, right? You like messed up, and now you get all these off flavors, and you have to like dump it down the drain.
That is exactly what happened when I made my own beer.
When you made your own beer,
it was terrible.
It was terrible, and you get like really heavy, meaty. So what happened was you let it ferment a little too long, or maybe you got the ratio of sugar to yeast wrong, or something like that, and
Probably
it went through probably both, right? And it goes through autolysis, and it tastes awful. But these distilleries do it intentionally because it adds such a flavor, so much weird, like interesting flavor aromas to it. And I've always talked about how like regionality doesn't really matter in Scotch, because like if they're basically sourcing the barley from Baird's or Port Ellen or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's not agriculturally driven, right? But there's actually localized bacteria that's highly localized per distillery. Even if they're like a mile away, the localized bacteria is a little bit different. And when you go to a distillery, any distillery tour in Scotland they'll talk about the temperatures of the water in the mash tun, and they'll be like, all right, first we put it at 60 degrees Celsius, then 75, and then 95. It never gets up to 100 degrees Celsius, because if it did, it would kill all the local bacteria. Okay. And they actually intentionally keep it, and that's part of the signature. And if you go digging, because I'm weird and I go digging, but I went digging through one of Bill Lumsden's old interviews. And he basically said if we took all of the equipment and all the ingredients and everything and switched them from Ardbeg and Glenmorangie, we would not be able to recreate the other whiskeys. And they were like, why? And he was like, it has to do with fermentation. And he didn't explain it. And I forever tried to figure out what it was. And it has to do with that. Right. And these guys, because they're doing this really long fermentation, you get those really, really heavy, oily, estery components, and they stay there the whole time. And it just, that plus oxygen, it's beautiful.
Well, I remember Ardbeg and Lafroig had their own little thing where Lafroig was really trying to make what Ardbeg made.
No. Oh, was it? It was Lagavulin and Lafroig.
Lagavulin
and crazy
Lafroig.
Peter Mackey.
Yes,
it was crazy Peter Mackey in 1908. Yeah. He basically tried to put them out of business.
Right. And tried to make what they were making by taking all of their people and matching their stuff. And that probably is what made it possible.
And for years everybody thought like, oh, that's evidence that like the water source is really contributing to the flavor. They have the same exact water source.
Right.
In fact, Peter Mackey literally dammed up the water source, and there was a whole injunction. The judge made him undo it, and so they recreated it. And if you ever go into Lagavulin gift shop, the gift shop is they renovated the distillery that Peter Mackey tried to make of Lafroig. The copy of Lafroig he tried to make, they renovated it and they turned it into a gift shop because it never worked. Yeah.
What a great FU.
True that. Oh man.
So what do you think of this 18?
I think it's awesome. I think it's a little meatier than the 15.
It's definitely meatier,
right?
But I'm getting more than I thought I would. I'm getting like half of what I would normally get here, and it's the oiliness that you described, the meatiness that you said, a little bit of that like orchard, kind of like maybe a little peach, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. Totally.
And then I'm kind of failing to get much more than that, but it's chewy. Like it's funny that you do that. Right. I was like, it's got like a full body to it. Yeah.
I mean, based on the long fermentation they do, the 104 hour or whatever it ends up being, the long fermentation they do, the still shape and size, and then they take a pretty low cut, not super low, not like Lafroig low. So in case anybody's wondering, where you take the spirits cut will dictate to the oiliness of the spirit. So it's really interesting. Like Macallan,
the heads and the tails,
right? Where you take the heads and the tails.
Right.
Macallan. One of the great ironies about Macallan, and I love the Macallan. I know some people are like, "What? You love the Macallan?" Yeah, I love the Macallan. Like, I really enjoy the Macallan. Yeah, but I like the old stuff. But
have you tried the 5 editions that they've got?
I can't drink that stuff. Yeah, it doesn't do it for me. Okay. The old cast strength stuff that they used to do, I loved. And the old 18 years I was just obsessed with. But it used to be affordable, and it used to be like, oh, you know what you're doing because you have the 18 year. Now it's like, oh, you've got a big checkbook. Right. But the big irony of Macallan is they've got those tiny little stills, right? So tiny little stills means all the heavy compounds are escaping the still. But then, do you know what they take their spirits cut at? 68. It's one of the highest cuts in the industry.
I was going to say, you said 63 earlier was typical, right?
Yeah, no, 63 is the usual filling strength. Yeah.
Sorry.
But like 63 actually, by the way, is like relatively usual, and then they water it down to 63.5 for the filling strength. Yeah. But 63 is like pretty standard in the industry. 68 is one of the highest, which basically means they're creating all these big, heavy, oily compounds with this big, fat still, and then they're not keeping any of them. Right. And they're like, oh, we take the narrowest cut. It's like, congratulations, that makes you Macallan instead of Glendronach.
Right.
And so that's it, right? It's like, it's just less texture.
So
regional expression is one of the advantages of wood fermentation tanks over steel. Ask Nick why. Because of there's two things. One, the wood actually is better at insulating, but more importantly than that, a bunch of the local bacteria actually lives in the wood itself. I believe it was Bowmore that like really famously replaced all their all their wooden washbacks with stainless steel. They spent a ungodly amount of money doing it, and then had to replace all of them back because they couldn't recreate the spirit the way they wanted it.
I've never even. Yeah, no, I guess that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking to myself, I'm like, all right, so my cutting board is antimicrobial, but it's bamboo. It's not.
Right.
Yeah, right. So I'm like,
and they're using Douglas fir, right? They're all using Douglas fir.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nice. I liked that 18. It was very different than. I'm actually noticing all of these are very different from each other.
They're delightfully diverse. I think the consistency through them is big oil.
Yep.
Big heavy oil. And that's what I like about. I mean, like my go-to whiskeys are like Clynelish, Mortlach, Springbank, Highland Park, Old Pulteney. Like I like big, greasy, heavy, oily mouthfeel.
Have you had any of the higher age Craigellachie?
I have had those.
Yeah, like the
32 and the 23.
Really
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I had it at the Craigellachie Hotel.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, at the Craigellachie Hotel. I went to dinner there with really weird. I went to dinner there with the owner of Walker Shortbread Cookies.
Okay.
Which
you meet some interesting people.
You meet some interesting people, right? And he was like, "Oh, you're really interested in whiskey. Like, I'll take you to this really famous Scotch whiskey bar."
Okay.
And I went into the Craigellachie Hotel, and like it's a decent whiskey bar, but like nothing special. We have dinner. I have smoked salmon. We have a few and I've got the list. I'm like, all right, whatever. This isn't what I don't understand. And the manager comes downstairs. And he's the GM of the whole place. And he's like, Mr. Walker, would you and your guests like to come up to the library? I've been to 10 distilleries. I'm already hungover. The last thing I want to do is go up and read a book.
Right.
And I go upstairs, and of course,
you
know what the library is, right?
Of course, yeah.
And it's a really high ceiling, and it's like one of those ladders that you have at a library.
Oh, awesome.
On every wall, just covered in whiskey.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so they're talking in Scottish, right, which is a different language. And they're going back and forth. I'm not really paying attention. And finally, the guy goes, "Oh, laddie, why don't you have a flight on the house? Anything you want."
Right. Like you might as well say like,
"What would you like?" And the guy everybody turns and looks at me. The place goes quiet, and I'm like,
yeah.
And I'm at the Craigellachie Hotel. So you know what I did? I said,
Kragelicky.
I'll try all the Kragelickys you
There
have.
you go. Nice.
And I just said, I went down the line. 13, 17, 19,
choice.
23, 32. Just crushed. It was awesome. But
That's
yes.
really awesome. Yeah.
What were you going to say about the Kragelickys?
It was more that this kind of reminded me, some of the characteristics of this reminded me of the Kragelicky 13
Worm tubs,
that I had.
right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I haven't done anything higher than the 13 on the channel before. I think I tried the 17.
17's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I think I tried that once. But it was among other things, so I didn't remember much.
Yeah. I love the 17.
Yeah.
I love the 17. Rosebank. Rosebank was worm tubs as well.
Rosebank, okay.
Rosebank's
I have not had Rosebank before.
Rosebank's one of my favorite, really it's one of my favorite closed distilleries.
Okay.
One of those just sort of white whale drams.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually ironically like very hit or miss. You can have some really bad ones, but when they're done well, oh god, they're awesome.
Nice. Well, if I ever run across any, I know who to.
If you ever run across any, call me.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm actually very happy that you've been talking so much tonight because, as you can tell, my voice.
You lose your voice a little bit.
It kills me. So I got sick like 2 days ago, and I was just like, oh, good. It's not like I have my first guest in person ever on the stream coming up, and I can't wait for this. This will be great. So, how you doing on that 18? Because I'm dying for our special dram here.
Fire away. Let's do it. All right. And I'll drink some water because I keep.
So, I don't know if you guys could see that, the 25. So, Nick was very courteous. He says, hey, sorry for bringing such a small cut of the Huddart or Huddart. Before the stream started, I was like, don't say Huddart. And he's like, so I brought you the 25 to make up for it. I'm like, that seems fair.
Good change.
Yeah, good
right?
change.
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to get this one out of the way. Yeah, definitely clean glass.
yeah, for sure.
Now we're really starting to get. You can see the effect on the color, right? Like, beautiful. And this is 22 years in ex-bourbon,
Okay.
and then a further maturation for 3 years in oil
First fill?
associated butts. They didn't tell me that much, but I'm guessing that it's second fill ex-bourbon.
Okay. Would make sense. I mean, that's on.
Honestly,
on character.
that's like. Oh right, I'll leave this here. This thing I don't even know.
Put it right in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. There we go.
There you go.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's like I have an eye for this thing.
Have you done this before?
Just once or twice.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited about this.
Me too. Does anybody else out there, have you ever had the 25? Thank you. Just so that you guys know what we're getting into here. I'm excited.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for bringing this and coming. Mostly this. Oh, that smells beautiful. Yeah, I don't even want to talk or.
Yeah,
Or
right.
just-
We're supposed to do stuff other than just drink the stuff, right? Oh
Yeah.
man, damn
Yeah,
it.
Maybe.
Maybe. All right, so you're starting to get that really super orchard fruit, right?
Yeah, yep.
And it's very funny if you ever have like a Bobbler 1983 or some of the really the other like the Anok 24 year, they all have the same. That they're all using the same blender basically, and single malt distilleries all have master blenders, right? Because they have to keep it consistent.
Makes sense.
But I swear, Gordon and MacPhail's, even across distilleries, there's like a sweet spot where they want to bottle it. And I'm positive that the same thing happens with IBHL because there's a signature to their older whiskeys. And it's like, once it hits that really overripe fruit, they're like, boom, let's bottle this.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny how it sort of manifests differently based on the single malt they're using. But you kind of always get it.
So I'm actually getting a little bit of apricot as well as peach.
I'm getting like palm oil, like coconut palm oil too. It's like really.
I always wonder to myself whether I'm just 100% influenced by the thing you just said, or
Yes,
if
there's no question about it. Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh yeah, no, I see it.
No, but that happens.
Yeah.
I'm getting like plantains with maple syrup on it.
I see the maple syrup. I don't know what a plantain smells like off the top of my head.
Plantain smells like a really overripe banana to me.
Yeah.
So if that's not what it actually smells like, that's what I'm smelling. Really overripe banana.
Okay.
Although I recently discovered that it's funny because I smell banana on like a ton of whiskey. Yes. I like bananas. And I always tell people this because people are like, man, like the expert got different. Not that I'm the expert. Like people are like, oh, the distillery manager came and like he gets different tasting notes than me. Right. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's because tasting notes are all referential. If you've never had an apple, you don't know what an apple tastes like.
That's a good point.
And so like people used to always say this tastes like marzipan. Mm-hmm. I never liked marzipan. Right. Never ate marzipan. Never get marzipan as a tasting note.
Yep.
But I eventually knew what they were talking about with marzipan, so I like would recognize it. But you know what I mean? You're like, oh,
100%. I was actually just. It's funny you bring that up. So I was reading this. I forget the name of the theory, but there's this concept where if I show you 5 different shades of blue, and I tell you between these 2 shades of blue, there's a 6th shade of blue. Mm-hmm. Your brain can envision what that shade of blue might look like, even if it's like it just doesn't exist. Whoa. You know, like it's something weird. So kind of like what you were saying, if you've never had an apple, you can still kind of
detect what the hell people are talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
yeah.
So,
that's
did you try a sip yet? Or?
I just had a little sip.
I'm gonna, Okay, that's good. That's really, really good.
Yeah. So one fun trick, which you can do with any whiskey, but I love doing it with this one in particular, is after you swallow the whiskey, keep your mouth closed, exhale through your nose. The explanation that somebody had for me is, particularly with old whiskey, basically it's older whiskey's harder for your palate to break down. Okay. That's one of the reasons why, like, if you drink this and then that's the last thing you have, you'll still taste it in the morning.
Yep.
I've had the pleasure of trying a 58-year-old Glen Grant by Gordon and MacPhail. And that's I could still taste it the next morning.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's really hard for your palate to break it down. And so if you exhale back through your nose,
okay.
You're sending all of the flavors back through your olfactory senses.
Okay.
And the fact of the matter is, our taste buds are very they're very underdeveloped. Like they're not very good. You can only really taste 5 things: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, umami, right?
Yeah.
So all of taste is really smell. Mm-hmm. And so if it's changing as it's going down, you're basically sending those changes back up.
Okay.
So I always thought that was really cool.
That is interesting.
With this, when I do that, you get way more finish and you get really cool spice notes.
Yeah.
So I start getting like almost cinnamon nutmeg notes, like I'm having a really good old bourbon. It's really interesting. 50 Shades of Grey. Did somebody think I said 50 Shades of Grey?
No, they were referencing my blue thing. I was actually laughing at Eric's comment. So if I'm to believe the beginning of our stream here, what you just told me is complete bullshit.
Yeah, might be.
All right, cool. Yeah.
Totally possible.
Totally possible.
But I just want you to know I'm regurgitating other people's bullshit.
Absolutely. Yes. As we all do.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying not to. My goal has always been to seek the truth underneath all the bullshit, but mm-hmm. you never know. So
Eric, I'm going to tell you why I do that. Other than the fact that just in general I'm tipping my head back, I read when I first started tasting whiskey that the best thing to do when you're tasting or smelling or whatever, sit in a room with as little distractions as humanly possible. Ceiling is white, and so I'm staring at a white ceiling while I'm trying to think about what it tastes like. That's the entire reason. It might also be complete bullshit. No, there's a reason I do it. Yeah.
That's funny because people 50 Shades of Grey and they'll think this is kinky, but I used to when I was really
curious where this is going.
When I was really getting into whiskey, like when I was first just trying like every random thing I could with whiskey, which sounds like when you just like first meet your girlfriend. Right. I used to take a whiskey and I would sit in a completely pitch black room. Okay. I would put a blindfold on and I'd put noise canceling headphones on and I would just like try to sensory deprivation myself and then taste what I would taste in the whiskey.
Yep.
Cool, weird experiences.
Totally. No, that's
like
awesome.
Getting drunk in dark silence
while wearing it. You wake up and you're like, I can't see. You know, it'd be the ultimate experience. Go in one of those sleep deprivation, the sensory deprivation tanks.
Yeah.
You know, the salt water thing. Where
Yes.
It's totally dark.
Yes.
And just have somebody give you whiskey.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh man.
Oh, this is really good. Now the 1983 was still dramatically different than even this.
Way different.
Yeah, because I remember it tasting like kind of like plums, if I remember correctly. Just like very, it was very like solid. I was gonna say solid body, very like substantial body to it, but it was almost like very like black cherries and like plums and like darker fruits to me. If I'm even remembering correctly. Honestly, a lot of times I go back and I rewatch my own videos to try to remember
Just
what
see
I
what
think
it,
about
yeah,
them.
yeah.
I know some fellow sommeliers who stare into the glass when they are blind tasting and they completely black out everything around them. Yeah, totally. I think that makes sense. I mean, you're reducing the distraction. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
One very bizarre study that I was reading about is like apparently it concluded, I should say, again, might be regurgitating, right? But it concluded that the basically the chemistry, your mouth chemistry changes based on your environment. And the number one experience I ever had with that is when Zach and I bought our first cask. We literally laid out all our capital.
Okay.
And we bought a cask completely blind. It was a Highland Park, and Gordon and McPhail just were like, "It's good, trust me." And we're like,
Yeah.
"Can we taste it?" And they're like, "No." And in fact, you have 6 hours to decide.
Okay.
And we're like, "Okay,
Yeah.
do we want to buy this $40,000 cask, sight unseen, right?" And we bought it, and we waited like 7 months for it to land, just being like, did we just blow the entire company overnight? Yeah. You know what I mean? And it landed, and I was so jacked up when it landed and so stressed and nervous that I was tasting it, and I just was like, it just tasted like metal. I couldn't, because I had so much adrenaline. And so I read this study where like, if you change your environment, you basically are changing your chemistry, because you're changing all your hormones and everything. And I think it's really interesting to like listen to different types of music when you try something. Okay. You know, like if you find something you really like try it under very different conditions and just like tweak the conditions and see what happens. It's really fun.
So what you're saying is I need to build a whiskey studio in my house and talk to my wife into doing that and tell her that you told her.
Yeah,
okay.
That's perfect.
That's what I heard.
No.
Yeah,
that
totally
was
need to change my
absolutely
scenery.
the right conclusion.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's it.
Actually, it's funny. She's been encouraging me to do exactly that. And I keep telling her, I'm like, I don't know, you know, like that's just like a whole area of my house. I don't know. I think I would like to do that, but I don't know. That's kind of a big deal.
It's a big step. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, I kind of like sitting at my kitchen table.
I kind of like sitting at your kitchen table too, particularly when there's really good whiskey.
Yeah, but this helps.
This helps. Yeah, this helps. This is really awesome.
So why don't you take a minute, just since some people have been came in late or whatever, to remind people kind of what you do, who you are.
Fair
and
enough.
We'll
Yeah,
sign
thank
off.
you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, because I want to have some more of this, but I want to do it.
But I want to do it. Yeah. So where we can be quiet and turn on music and do all the different. Put the blindfolds on. Yeah. No. So just to wrap up. Thank you guys. It was a pleasure to meet you guys. I'm Nick Taylor. I founded Taylor and Taylor Whiskey Co. with my brother. We're the local New England brand ambassadors for Old Pulteney, Ball Blair, Annock, Speyburn. But we also do tons of whiskey education stuff. And we do a little importing as well, which if you ever allow somebody to do non-whiskey, I might come back and pour you something fun.
All right.
Or maybe I'll pour a bunch of whiskey and like one little thing.
That actually, there's plenty of things that are rum finished, right?
Yes.
Rum cask
Hell
finished.
yeah.
I could totally see doing that.
I think that'd be fun. Be really fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on.
No, it's my pleasure.
Thank you guys for joining us here on the Whiskey Dictionary and drinking with us. And I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.